Morning, you all. It's a pleasure to see you this morning here. Let me just try to combine here a few strands of the discussion yesterday and some reflections we made. I think that there was a word of caution to the fact that the concept of class may mislead us, so we should be careful with that. It needs some further work so that we can really talk about it meaningfully, especially when we are combining economic approach with anthropological, sociological approach. The term class, classically implies an idea of discontinuity. Somehow you have to have cutting lines and some form of consciousness among the groups, below or above some cutting line, and that is a hard thing to detect or to find when you are talking about a process of this size that we see nowadays in the world. We are talking about, when we say the new middle class, we are talking about something like 40 or 50% of the population, ascending somehow, or having higher levels of consumption, showing some ambition to move further upwardly. So it is somewhat, it is a bit difficult to apply the concept of class. We should be careful about that. So at least as a starting point, I think it is useful to say that what we see in the world is a giant process of mobility. You see, immense groups that previously were excluded from the basics of modern consumption suddenly began to be included in that world. What are the causes of this? Many were mentioned here. Of course, the growth of world trade, 2 decades ago, the opening of the economies, stabilization of the economies. In the case of Latin America, that's very clear. It was impossible to keep growth going when we had extreme instability in terms of inflation, and Brazil was the last country in Latin America to stabilize. The stabilization made it possible to expand credit. So the amount of credit offered for consumption was very modest in the case of Brazil, for example, and of course, extremely high inflation was an impediment to that. So there are many sources there. But the fact is that, and of course, in the last 10 years, under Lula, more affirmative social policies helped a lot. Since the previous decade, the minimum real wage was being readjusted above inflation. But then with Lula, we began to have some broadly based social policies, and that also happened. So also helped. A clear indication of this is that in Brazil, the region that grew most was the Northeast, which traditionally was the poorest, not only the poorest, but the one which had the most difficulty growing. So it's a whole bunch of causes and processes that we are talking about. The end result of that is this immense process of change that I'm trying to describe. Now the question is, how do we, what can we say about the impacts of this process on societies? What can we say about its social, cultural, let's put it that way, impact on one hand, the economic impacts on the other, political impacts on the other. And how do we go about, describing and researching those impacts? Here we have some difficult questions, of course, because we are, as I'm trying to point out, what we are trying to describe is the same society that was here before, except that now it's moving. It has a new dynamic. So we are talking about a description, how to go about describing this society under this new condition of strong or powerful mobility processes. I think one point which seems to me essential is to distinguish the macro and the micro conditions of this growth. So when we talk on the economic side, I think if I understand well what the economists say, I cannot swear on that, but they give me the impression they really know what's going on. Those are the reasons, just say X, Y, and Z are the reasons why this thing got moving. Now, and then we ask, is this sustainable? And of course, they have an answer. If we have growth and if we keep the social policies, the readjustment policies the way they have been, yes, the mobility will go on for a long time and the society will change, have less inequality and less poverty. Fine. However, if you look at the sustainability question from the micro point of view, this means that people have to invest a lot in themselves in terms of human capital. They have to study more and study in a different way, not just to have a diploma, but really to get prepared for a much more competitive world. A strong example yesterday that for those who are in the upper reaches of this C class, the powerful cause or the main factor was really the labor market. It was the fact that they went into a very in a labor market which was demanding labor, and they kept they were able to take advantage from that and get better wages and actually to pick out jobs instead of being thrown out from one and going to the other. So it was the labor market was very favorable in the upper reaches of this interval which we call C class. How about the lower intervals? Here we are talking about people who just hardly can read, write and read. We're talking about very poor people with very low levels of education and almost without what we could broadly call social skills, organizing skills, management skills, and things like this. Take, for example, attempts to create a small firms, small enterprising adventures, but they fail like hell because people are simply not prepared to manage them. I cannot disregarding the fact that the tax burden is heavy, that the bureaucracy is tremendous, etc. But there is a fact that they lack management skills. So this is another of those factors which I would call micro. We could go on forever with this, but I think the main point is here. When we, in 2010, my friend Mauricio de Souza, who I regret is not here because he passed away, unfortunately, but we did a survey in a book, and this message was very clear. People were, in our research, were showing, you see, a desire to keep going, to move up. People were more verbally more ambitious than I never saw before. However, when you look at their objective indicators of education and skills, it's extremely low. They want their children to be better education. This, by the way, is a worldwide familiar finding. But the problem which we observe very frequently in Brazil is that small children go to school, and after 2 or 3 years, the family can't be very helpful because the family knows less than they do. So if then you take into account another familiar finding that the family is crucial in learning, we have a problem there. We cannot be too optimistic about this unless we find ways of teaching a lot better. Now, just to conclude, my fraternal enemy, Sergio Fausto, asked me to talk about political impacts of these processes. Again, I tend to think along the same lines. If we are talking about half of the population, in the case of Brazil, we are talking about half of the population means something like, just in terms of voters, we are talking about 60 million people. We can think of that as huge, immense sample of the population. They're going to, that's going to behave the same way that people do. Unless we are talking about a change, unless we are talking about dislocation of a much greater impact, it's very hard to see in the short run, what this will cause politically. I think it's the striking political changes are often not related to class position. Take, for example, in the 1990s, when President Cardoso was elected in the first round. Well, this was inflation, and the country voted the same way, and he won in every state. So the issue was, a fact that impacted on people exactly the same way, homogeneous all over the country. And it's like a communications system. So people receive the same message the same day and they respond to the same way. So we cannot really think of that, about that in terms of class. Now, then if you withdraw these big impacts caused by a once and for all factor, well, the alignments, the divisions are those that we have had for a long time. For example, here in the city of São Paulo, we have a political separation between the more popular quote-unquote and the more elite quote-unquote parties, since God created the world. It has been here for a long time and hasn't changed. So I think that in order to really understand the political impact, we have to do a lot more, much better research. And I think in order to do that, I'm not now going to conclude, I think it would be good to look into attitudes, beliefs, and I don't want to use the word ideology, but subjective factors with different methods, because I think so far we have been just on the surface of that without really understanding people's minds. Of course, anthropology can do it much better than political science can at the present stage. Secondly, I would say that in the next few years, a crucial area, it seems to me, is the formation of policy demands. You see, how people articulate their wishes, their interests, and how they try to impact on local, state and national governments. I say that because, of course, people are entering a world where they will become more conscious of, of the value of money, of what they want to buy on that, how much tax they pay, what they get in return for their taxes. So I think there will be a process of politicization, not in the classical traditional sense of left right, but in the sense of participation to defend one's interests, in a more immediate environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolívar. I'm tempted to do something unorthodox here, but before I do that, because I will do that, let me just thank our sponsors, BMF Bovespa, Embraer, and COSAN, without whom it would be not really feasible to put together not only this seminar, but the seminar we had yesterday, which was a closed seminar. And actually, we brought together a bunch of economists. They were trying hard to explain the causes of the emergence of the new middle classes in Brazil. And I don't know about you, but I came out of this meeting before without really knowing what the causes were. It was really exciting. So let me do something unorthodox here, just to provoke you, Bolívar. I think it's what do you make of the argument made by André Singer in his most recently book, which, trying to make a long story short, the argument is that the re-election of Lula in 2006 sort of generated a long-term political electoral realignment through which the poor aligned with PT and Lula, and the old middle class aligned to the opposition, right? And that the big challenge of the PT now is to kept this kind of realignment in capturing the votes of the people as they move on up in the social ladder. Do you think that makes sense? This idea that it's very contrary to what you have just said, that a structural and long-term realignment has been generated. Does it make sense or not, in your opinion?
Well, it's a very sophisticated argument. You know, Sinja is an excellent political scientist and he did a lot of research. I would play the devil's advocate just to start, you know. I think what we have in Brazil is what we have had over the last 20 years is the combination of very favorable economic conditions for the lower income levels, combined with the presence of a charismatic leader, you know, from the Northeast, you know, former worker, etc., who was able to after Cardoso, personify the process, right? Well, this kind of impact, you know, politically speaking, it can last for quite a while, of course, but not particularly because it is the very, very low groups of society. You know? For example, if you take Peronism in Argentina, it was not the underdog, it was the working class, the organized working class. And the fact is there even today. You see, you can't say anything in Argentina if you don't start with Peron, you know. Then you can say anything you want, but you've got to start that way. Even in Brazil, the Vargas legacy lasted quite a while, and it would have lasted a lot longer were not for the military intervention in '64. Was Vargas really doing you know, a good job for the underdog? No, not really, for the organized working class, right? So I think we should look at this quite more carefully. The other thing is that we are. It is too optimistic to imagine that that Brazil is going to get so much richer that the PT is going to have that kind of problem. So the poor will not become middle class in the Western sense, you know, of really getting away from the origins. They will continue to be poor in a absolute or objective sense for quite a while. So I don't think that the process takes place in the minds of these people, but in the minds of the PT people. So what they do, what they represent, what symbols they are able to personify, what policies they follow, and that is the question. You see, it's the party machine that will have to change.
Thank you, Bolívar.